All right, hello everyone. My name is Michael Heinsdorf from Avitru, and thank you for joining us today in our ongoing web series with Sustainable Minds called Transparency is the New Green. And we'll talk about how transparency is affecting product selection and specification. Um, we've recently partnered together to make it a lot easier for architects, engineers, and contractors to get sustainability information through MasterSpec. And we'll chat a little bit about that in a minute or so. Just for today, we are going to have a little bit of a different format than normal. Normally, it's just Terry and I talking about what we've been doing and how some things have been coming through MasterSpec and are now available. We have a special guest today, Wendy Vittori from the Health Product Declaration Collaborative. She is a Harvard-educated scientist who's been working in the field for quite a while, and she's going to give us an update on what's happening with the Health Product Declaration, which is the most popular transparency disclosure currently out there. And as I've talked about Terry a couple of times, there's Terry Swack from Sustainable Minds. Sustainable Minds runs the Transparency Catalog. Today we're going to be talking about the Sustainable Minds 2017 Product Transparency Trend Report, which is going to talk about transparency, how it relates to product data, and then Wendy will talk a little bit about that very popular transparency report, the HPD. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end of it. Just a little bit about Avitru. We are formerly known as RCOM. We are the exclusive producers of MasterSpec, which is the AIA's Master Guide Specification. We have over 60 people who work on putting out all the content and software that makes MasterSpec what it is. We have about 900 plus guide specifications out there, which we are shortly planning to hook into the transparency catalog. So that will have one place for architects and engineers to quickly grab product transparency data while they're going ahead and editing or choosing products within specifications. It is the most widely used guide specification system in the United States. We have, off the ENR top 500 list, 22 out of the top 25 firms use MasterSpec, and I believe it's just about 80% of the top 100 use MasterSpec. We've recently changed leadership, changed our mission a little bit, and that's why we talk about we are committed to constructing a world where better building leads to better lives, which is kind of the ethos that drives the company at this point in time. And Sustainable Minds is a business-to-business provider of environmental product transparency cloud applications and services. Terry started several years ago with a couple software tools that are out there, and recently they have started with the Transparency Catalog. And with that, I'll hand it over to Terry.
Thank you, Michael. We are really proud and excited to be partnering with Avitru and MasterSpec to bring product transparency to the mainstream in 2018 and beyond. And this is the story that we'll be telling in the trend report of what's happened in product transparency since it was introduced in 2012 through 2017, and what it's going to take to keep things moving forward through 2018 and beyond. We know from the high level that we've put this partnership together, there are some key things that we can do to accelerate the highest performing, greenest building processes. So together we're going to be working on making it possible to get product transparency information into building product specifications and being able to cross-link between the catalog and product master specs. We're going to be making it possible for AECs and specifiers to learn more about the products that they'll be selecting and specifying in that process, and be able to access that information in a reasonable way using the tools that both of us are providing. And of course, you're going to see this is the theme. lots more education needs to happen, not only continually through delivery in this way, but education needs to be delivered through the tools that you're using so that you're learning in real time while you're doing. We believe that through this partnership and commitment to moving these ideas forward, that we will be able to make a reasonable change and influence the way products get selected and specified, and ultimately to create a built environment that has less impact on the natural environment and human health. But part of this story today, and again, we're really proud to have Wendy with us, for Wendy to layer onto this story what she's been leading folks at the HPDC and in that community really in the same direction and hitting these same topics. And that's what she'll be talking about today as well. So this is the overview of the 2017 Product Transparency Trend Report. Let me just say the actual report will be available next week, and all of the folks who have registered for today's webinar and tomorrow's webinar will automatically be sent the report. Otherwise, it will be available through the Transparency Catalog as well as through the HPDC website and Avitru and certainly some other places as well. But here's the big picture of what you're going to find in the report. We're going to start out like any technical report. We're going to provide definitions and the methodology that we used for data collection and present the results right up front. The next section is really the state of product transparency. What have we found and what has been happening? I'm going to introduce the theory of diffusion of innovations and show how that theory really sets the frame for what's been happening in product transparency. We're going to show you how we've used this data collection process to build and maintain the transparency catalog. And in fact, it was this motivation to track what's happening in the industry that drove the development of the catalog. And you'll understand how it is and will continue to be an up-to-date, constant resource for all the manufacturers who are investing in product transparency and making that information understandable, meaningful, and useful, which we'll talk about a little bit further on. We're going to present this idea that product transparency is really about performance, and what is being reported in these disclosures is really performance criteria. So how do we use that information to evaluate performance in our decision-making process? We're going to look at what's changed over time, who's asking for this information, what the data can't tell us today, and we're going to look at what the growing pains are and what we're going to need to do to move things forward from early adoption to early mainstream based on what will success look like. Now, in today's webinar, we're going to spend most of our time going through the overview and the state of product transparency, that big story. We'll just touch on some of the data that we've collected from the environmental reporting and the material ingredient reporting sections. But next month and the month after, the two subsequent webinars with Avitru will then drill into the data, the standards, the information around environmental reporting. That will be next month's webinar, and then the webinar after that will be really drilling into the detail and data and understanding of the material ingredient programs. So starting out, the overview section, this overview section describes the processes and the definitions for how we collect the data to build and maintain the transparency catalog. So knowing that the goal of the catalog is to acknowledge and reward all the manufacturers investing in product transparency, it includes all of the brands that have products with any kind of transparency disclosure that has been identified as eligible to earn product transparency credits and criteria in the green building rating systems that reward manufacturers and building professionals for specifying those products. So the two types of transparency credits are based on two types of technical studies. So the manufacturers doing these technical studies and disclosing the findings in one or more types of public-facing documents. So the two types of technical studies, one reports on and discloses environmental performance. It evaluates the life cycle impacts, and there is only one type of disclosure using one technical standard. It's ISO 14025, and the technical disclosure type is called a Type 3 environmental declaration. EPD is a colloquialism. Environmental product declaration is slang essentially for Type 3 environmental declaration. That's the actual term from the technical standard. So the tool that gets created from the first part of ISO 14025 is called a product category rule. And so those are the rules. So ISO 14025 includes the rules for how PCRs get created. And the rules that go into a PCR are the rules for how life cycle assessment gets done for a particular product category. And it also includes the rules for what content must be included in a Type 3 environmental declaration based on this PCR. Now, the material ingredient technical studies evaluate the potential hazards and risks of the materials used in the product, and there are a number of disclosure programs and rating systems that have been identified as eligible, and there have been more added over time. Originally, there were 4 when LEED v4 was introduced, and now there are more. We're going to break those down in that section of the report. But keeping in mind, all of the products listed in the catalog meet the eligibility requirements for one or both types of credits in one or more of those green building rating systems. So here are the green building rating systems that reward product transparency. 3 of them reward environmental performance, and 4 of them reward material ingredient disclosures, and there are a few different credits offered. And again, on the left side, we're pointing out that we collect data for the catalog from all of the North American program operators listed here, and we collect material ingredient disclosure data from the material disclosure programs and rating systems listed here as well. We do that on a monthly basis, and every time there's a new manufacturer who has invested in product transparency, we add them to the catalog with a new free listing. Now, here's the punchline. I didn't do a drum roll, but here's the punchline. It turns out of 34 active CSI MasterFormat divisions, there has been product transparency disclosures created in 24 of those divisions, with a total number of 1,225 EPDs and 8,404 material ingredient disclosures. So just a little bit about what you're seeing here. We wanted to point out finishes and furnishings are certainly the largest MasterFormat divisions in terms of activity. Wanted to point out 2 key points. Finishes is a really broad division in terms of the kinds of products that are actively being selected and specified on a day-to-day basis for buildings. And furnishings has so many material ingredient disclosures because over 3,900 of them are BIFMA level certificates. So BIFMA has done a great job of getting its members' products certified and has done a great job at getting level to be one of those material ingredient rating systems accepted by the green building rating systems. So that's the punchline. That's the big story, and we're going to put that into some more context moving forward. So here's our story, the state of product transparency, and we're going to start with this premise that product transparency in the building products industry is a new technology, that while the science and methods behind the modeling, measuring, and evaluating are well established, its use in product selection and product marketing is the innovation, because those standards, those technical standards, were not necessarily created initially with this activity in mind. In 2012, when the USGBC announced LEED version 4 and announced product transparency as the cornerstone or one of the cornerstones of LEED version 4, the reasoning behind that was, the single attribute ratings and certifications in LEED version 3 and other green building rating systems that existed at the time do tell an important part of a story in a given product category. But this move to product transparency was important because what it calls for is the use of standardized scientific methods applied in the same way to all product categories to comprehensively measure the life cycle environmental impacts of products and the potential hazards and risks presented by the materials used in those products. So for the first time, here was this idea of let's measure everything all the same way so that we actually can ultimately see a path to making comparative decisions as well as being able to add up the total impacts of a building, because as we know, a building is simply a compilation of products. And to be able to understand the overall performance of a building, you have to be able to add up its component parts. So given this premise that product transparency is a technology in its now use in product transparency, it really firmly illustrates this theory of the diffusion of innovations. And this theory is pretty popular. It's used pretty often to describe how new technologies get introduced to the market and how they scale or why they don't scale. It's often used to tell the Betamax story, the internet story, and here we're using it to tell the product transparency story. And what's key is that there are four main elements that influence the spread of an innovation. So one, the innovation itself, communication channels, time, and a social system. And of course, the process relies heavily on people working hard to move this innovation forward. And when it finally gets to a certain point in the process, that's what we call the tipping point, when there is really no more turning back, that the trend has taken hold, it's moving forward firmly enough, and there's a whole bunch of things now that happen in a next phase to continue that trend moving forward. And so what we have found is that the social system, the architecture, engineering, and design community called on manufacturers to provide this information about their products and have continued to call upon them. The innovation has been to use the types of product transparency disclosure methods available, and also more have been created. It's now been 5 years, and there have been many contributors to the communication channel component, from the reporting program providers themselves, of which there are more, to the NGOs and nonprofits and industry organizations who represent both building professionals, the trade industry organizations, as well as the building professional organizations like the AIA and others. Certainly plenty of media and all of the solution providers who have identified the opportunity to drive revenue and growth through greener product innovation, both in the manufacturing sector to drive revenue and growth, but understanding the opportunity to participate in this cycle, to grow that. So there's certainly Sustainable Minds. We're have been in this space now for 10 years, but everyone, Mindful Materials, UL Spot, Ecomedes, et cetera, everyone has contributed to raising awareness and communication, and it's all good because we've really made considerable progress in ultimately achieving the goal, which is to create products that have higher performance, that have less impact on the built and natural environment. And so what we have identified is that we are arriving at the tipping point. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, what the data actually looked like. So I showed you that tabular data up front, but I'm going to show you what it looks like visually, because I think the visualization is quite dramatic. So when we launched the catalog in 2016 at Greenbuild 2016, we felt there were enough brands at that time to actually put together a catalog of just manufacturers and just their products with transparency information. But fast forwarding about 14 months to the end of December 2017, it went from 350 brands to 961 brands and industry organizations, with many more having environmental performance reports only, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is. 400 or so who have engaged in material reporting only, and we're rounding the corner towards 100 who have invested in both types. Now, during 2017, we added 313 manufacturers and industry organizations who participated in creating industry-wide EPDs. Now, some of those manufacturers had also created product-specific EPDs. Now, we didn't double count, but it was important to acknowledge the effort, and we'll talk about that too, of the industry associations and the value that they've brought to their members by making it possible to participate in product transparency in a way that gets them into the game where they might not ever have been able to participate because of the cost prohibitiveness and simply the complexity and difficulty of product transparency reporting. But then we also added almost 300 new manufacturers who had created product-specific EPDs and or material ingredient disclosures, which contributes to an 85% increase in the number of brands investing in product transparency in a matter of 14 months. So let's really just get down to what product transparency is really all about, because this hasn't really been the top priority conversation in discussing the drivers for product transparency. So let's get really clear about this. The term high performance, which may be traditionally referred to energy efficiency or water efficiency, resource efficiency, now includes environmental performance and material health by definition, because those credits are identified in not only green building rating systems, but also in building codes, green building codes that are evolving across the country. So it's part of high performance. High performance is how the industry defines successful buildings. And so now it's important to keep in mind front and center that environmental performance, which is actually just another way to say environmental impact, and material ingredients are performance criteria. So the primary intent for life cycle assessment has always been to be able for the manufacturer or the organization doing the life cycle assessment to use it for its own internal purposes, to be able to identify where the impacts are occurring across the life cycle of the products, and then to be able to bring new strategies to bear to mitigate those impacts or to drive real performance improvements in the life cycle stages where those impacts are occurring. And the same goes for the material ingredient assessments. It's to understand what materials, what ingredients in the materials, and then the materials themselves as ingredients into the products may be presenting risk and exposure concerns, and then to give the manufacturer the opportunity to start looking at alternative ingredients, alternative suppliers, ways to push the performance of the product in other ways. And it's important to note, and this will be part of the subject of the next webinar, that where there are impacts in the product system, there are always costs. So when impacts can be reduced, there's always cost benefits in a variety of ways. There, in and of itself, is a driver for product transparency before we even get into the public-facing sharing of information. And so, why is performance improvement important now? And it's important because of what we all are trying to do, which is to reduce the impacts from the built environment on the natural environment. And so because buildings are a compilation of products, performance actually matters. And so no one can manage what doesn't get measured. And so things have to get measured in a way that's meaningful, both by the manufacturer to make meaningful decisions about the way they make their products, and meaningful to the people who select, specify, install, and ultimately operate the buildings that these products get used in. So our bottom line to this key insight is that product transparency actually does build credibly greener brands and creates preference in the marketplace, but not by just producing disclosures. The value for manufacturers to provide this information about their products comes from understanding and being able to demonstrate that they understand what this information means and they know what they're doing. Now, the next insight is that we have seen over the 5 years changing attitudes about transparency, beginning with manufacturers being very, very reticent to put disclosures into the marketplace. There were a lot of industry-wide EPDs that were created to pool data, not only to pool efforts and costs to create EPDs, but also to hedge against product-specific disclosure risks. Many manufacturers did create disclosures, but didn't necessarily make them publicly available. They were waiting for people to ask for them. But what we've seen happen now, and this is one distilled quote, but certainly representative of many of the conversations that we've had, from one senior sustainability executive at a large multinational who said, well, we're really changing our attitude about our product transparency information. Up until now, we've not made it super available. But at this point, we're understanding that transparency is kind of expected. And we don't know what we don't know. We don't know if we're missing out on business opportunities because we haven't made our products with transparency information easy to find. And we also know that if that were true, it's not only possible that architects would be interested in doing business with us and going to look for those products, but we also think that our salespeople would be more proactive in the ability to represent and sell and recommend those products. That's one data point about who's asking for it. I think from an important trend perspective, and certainly from a social system trend perspective, the one surefire thing that is happening that isn't going to change is that the folks who fall into the millennial generation were the first ones to be born with devices as part of their daily routines, always in their hands. Data has always been available. They use data all the time to make decisions. It's expected. And by 2025, most of us baby boomers will have retired, and we're going to see that millennials will represent 75% of the workforce. That means transparency is not only not going away, it's going to continue to be fundamentally a requirement. And so those manufacturers who are interested in future-proofing and getting out ahead and being prepared, getting started now is not too soon. And you can see lots of folks already have. Now, this is the really big insight that I think will possibly surprise some of you who are on the call. What the data can't tell us is the number of products that are in the market today from all those manufacturers that have transparency disclosures associated with them or that cover those products. Now, to try to put some numbers to it and do something comparative, we took a look at the Suites catalog, which today, or as of February 21st, had 484 manufacturers and over 328,000 products. Now, when we look at how many total disclosures that have been created by the number of manufacturers that reported earlier, so it was over 900 manufacturers, over 9,600 total disclosures, we know that each one represents at least one product, but we know for certain most of them represent many, many more. We even have supported a manufacturer created HPDs that covered over 1,200 products. So if you look at the broad range that each of those disclosures could possibly represent, that's anywhere from 9,000 to 900,000 products that are available that have product transparency information. And that's not even considering the number of products that are covered in industry-wide EPDs, where so many manufacturers have contributed their data. And so we understood that challenge when we started the Transparency Catalog, which is why the Transparency Catalog listing for each manufacturer is designed with this table that allows the manufacturer to list all of their products by CSI MasterFormat division with a link to their website for more information, but with the types, each type of disclosure that they have and access to those disclosures right there correlated to each product. So in any one of these listings, there might only be 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 disclosures that the manufacturer has invested in, but there could be hundreds of products listed right here in the listing. Now it's super easy for AECs and anyone inside that manufacturer's organization, a sales rep, an architectural design rep, a spec rep, any of their partners, channel partners, to be able to go right here and find all of the products that they have with transparency information available. So to wrap up this section, there are definitely big growing pains that we're moving through to get us through this early adoption phase to early mainstream. And we use this framework that came out of the AIA Materials Industry Forum that Michael and I participated in at Greenbuild. And these are the 4 top challenges that came out of that discussion. The need for education, standardization of technical programs, ease of finding products with information, and the ability for manufacturers to demonstrate an ROI. So number 1, we fundamentally agree with everybody needs education, people in manufacturing organizations, as well as AECs in the industry, to be able to understand the information, know how to use it, really embrace that it's performance criteria. The next is that there's a lot that still needs to happen in the standardization of technical programs so that the ease of creating background reports and market-facing reports simpler, more cost-effective, easier for solution providers to do. There's a whole bunch of benefits to that. Now we all know that there actually are plenty of products. In this meeting, it was voiced that there was some question about there didn't seem to be enough products with transparency information, but that actually is not the case anymore. And finally, this is a big topic that we spend a lot of time talking with the manufacturers that we talk with, and we'll talk about this more on subsequent webinars, is the ability for manufacturers to demonstrate an ROI. But the fact is that what needs to happen internally at the manufacturer's organization is organizational change, that the folks who are making the disclosures, in large part, to a lesser degree, they're getting thrown over the wall, but the transition from the creation to sales and marketing and how they're distributed and how they're supported is still really in its infancy and operationalizing that particular part of the process. And so, manufacturers want to be able to demonstrate an ROI on their product transparency investments, but most of them, short of saying we won this project because we had an EPD, are still not sure actually how to calculate those ROIs. So what does success look like? Success looks like when we don't talk about green building anymore, just building, and product transparency gets fully integrated into product marketing. In the trend report that everyone will get, you'll see we have the data for the number of PCRs and EPDs and manufacturers. We kind of look at a deeper dive at where the reporting happened in what year. Took the same look at the material ingredient programs, what's important to understand. And again, this is all in the report. They do all follow the same steps, but there's a whole bunch of different criteria that a manufacturer has to consider in terms of which program they're going to use. And the same goes for AECs. You're going to use some of these same criteria in determining which disclosures are you asking for. And finally, it comes down to understanding what are you going to learn from each one. While they all use the similar process, some are disclosure programs that you learn some different things from, and some are rating systems that you learn other things from. And so really getting down to the educational brass tacks of what do you learn from these reports? How are you evaluating the performance criteria is going to change everything. And what I'd like to do now is introduce Wendy, who's going to talk about the work that they're doing at the HPDC up till now and going forward. So Wendy, take it away.
Thank you very much, Terry. And I'm so happy to be here with everyone today. Terry, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great, awesome. So let me dig right in just in the interest of time. A number of you on the line are already quite familiar with, and in fact, are co-creators through your participation as members of the HPD Collaborative and also members of our technical committees with what is the HPD Open Standard and what is the HPDC. We have a very specific goal, and our organization is totally focused on this one part that I think Terry well described, why this is so critical in the transformation of the industry to make this the norm. Just to briefly recap the history, although there were discussions prior to 2012, we officially launched the HPD Open Standard and the HPDC in 2012. And by now, we have gotten to the point where over 400 manufacturers are reporting. We have over 3,600 actually published. Published means publicly available HPD reports. And so our goal is to make reporting information in this manner completely normal for everyone and grow. What that looks like in terms of the diffusion is growing adoption of this approach. It's really important to understand what this standard is about. It's not a rating system and it's not a certification. And that has been a point that we've been working hard to clarify. What it is a stakeholder consensus standards governance process that results in having a specified format. So when you pick up an HPD report, you know the format it's going to be in, and very detailed instructions that tell both the manufacturer, the creator of the HPD, as well as the user of the HPD, exactly precisely what is to be in those boxes on the format. And so it represents not another way of doing things. It's designed from the outset as representing the agreement of the industry on how we are all going to agree to do this. So the end result is that we have accurate, reliable, and consistent reporting of these specified data elements over time. And so the standard itself expresses this industry agreement, which we then govern through our technical committee processes. And so that's a really important thing to understand. It's not just another way, it's intended to be an expression of the consensus. What does it cover? It covers reporting. So that's the very basic. What is the data and how do I report it? Disclosure. How much of this data am I going to report to whom? What level of precision and thresholds and so on are we going to use? How is confidential business information handled? And so the reporting is completely specified in the format and instruction, but disclosure and then ultimately the decision to engage in transparency, which means to make some or all of the information public. So when a document is fully transparent, 100% of the information is available to 100% of the people. But we know that there's a scale here. And what we're encouraging is people to start with reporting so that they are using the consistent format. And then as these practices take hold, as the business value proposition makes more sense and so on and so forth, they can then disclose more to more people. And ultimately, we are promoting the idea of transparency. Why? Because we know from other industries that have made this transition, my own background is in the technology industry, where we've seen how moving to a world of open standards and open collaborative innovation, even among people who compete, and we have rules for how to do this, can lead to much more rapid advancement of the technology that we're looking for. And the same is true here. So this is one of these things we call that builds the virtuous cycle. The more of something that happens, the more it works, the more that encourages more to happen. And so the cycle progresses and it gains acceleration, velocity gets greater, and the magnitude of what is happening grows. And what we're looking for is more of an exponential growth. So it's not just growing at the same amount every year, it's actually growing at increasing amounts as we go through time. And that is, to Terry's point earlier, what we are seeing in the acceleration of this movement. How does the basic standard work? It moves from manufacturer information through the reporting of the standard to produce a report. And this report, it's important to note, has not just a physical form as a PDF, which would be housed in the HPD public repository, but also has a form as data elements that can be electronically exchanged with cooperating applications. So every time we're able to do that and add value through these growing ecosystem of applications, then the data adds value, has more value, its use has more value, the aggregation of all the uses has more value, and again, that virtuous cycle is fueled. It's really important to note that the HPDC and the HPD Open Standard were designed from the beginning to work in this industry ecosystem. And so we want to work with that ecosystem to develop advanced tools for both creating and using this information. So decision-making tools for architects and designers, building owners, and so on, that help net out the so what of this information. This is not about making an architect, an average architect, although I am amazed at how many of you are really interested in learning about the chemicals, which is great. But as we broaden that adoption, that percentage of the users is going to probably be less than it is today. And so what we have to do is enable people who don't have the time or interest or inclination to become more knowledgeable about chemistry, industrial hygiene, toxicology, which are the underlying scientific disciplines that lie behind our work. We need to allow them to engage at a higher level of understanding. And that's where the tools, that's where the practice protocols need to come into the architecture, design, and construction communities that can transition from, it's got this list of chemicals, to the so what of how do I use that information to select and specify products. The same thing is true for the manufacturers. They're more obviously in touch with the ingredients of their products, but it's not been typical in the past that someone, let's say, who is making a complex office chair would know the chemical content to 100 parts per million of every chemical in that chair. Why? Not required to make the chair. They deal with what we call their tier 1 suppliers. And those people are providing to them materials like fabrics and foam and casters and other types of manufactured sub-assemblies and so on. Down somewhere multiple tiers below that are the actual providers of the raw materials, and that's where the chemical substances lie. So one of the things that is the heavy lift in this first few years is, number one, getting those manufacturers of those higher level products to understand why that information is now important. And I think Terry made a very good explanation, or it's around performance ultimately when you're considering health consequences, and also how to get at it. So this is where the HPD Open Standard provides a tool, and we have, in fact, information tools that help to use that basic tool, and we're developing more. And we have a few that are core tools that in HPDC we develop ourselves, and then we work with our colleagues throughout the ecosystem. So it's about really mobilizing all of these players toward getting to this goal. And again, the faster we do this, the more value we create. We fuel that virtuous cycle, which then creates the investment to do more. And here's just a depiction of some of the key players right now in this ecosystem. We are anticipating this growing substantially, and it certainly has been. You know, during the course of the time, the last 5 years that we've been working on this, several of the things that are now key players in this ecosystem didn't even exist at that time when this all started. And we expect more and more to be enabled to start to participate through the advancements that the rest of us are making. I just want to touch quickly on our organization, the HPD Collaborative. What we intend to do is provide a forum for industry-wide problem solving and collaboration. As I said, this isn't about HPDC has its view. It's about this growing community of people interested in this and expressing the consensus view of that group. And so to give you an idea, we opened our membership beyond the original 23 founding members back at the end of 2015. So a little over 2 years later, we now have 220 organizations. And I want to have a shout out here to those who are members that are on the call today. It is very much of a member-driven operation. All our technical committees are led, our board and so on are led. So this whole process is being led by colleagues and peers towards seeking that consensus and providing a governance process that is reliable in and of itself, so that as people engage, they have confidence that their efforts are actually going to result in change. And so in those next couple of bullets, you see some of the changes that we have actually in a very short period of time, the last few years, the first few years of our organization, we're kind of getting organized. But in the last 2 years, we've really emphasized pushing forward with revisions of our standard on an annual basis, building our public repository, as I mentioned already, over 3,600 published HPDs, which represent that number and more products. With over 300 manufacturers represented, we're seeing 100 to 200 new HPDs being published every month, and then connecting that electronically to other systems through our builder as well, which is a tool for manufacturers to use to create HPDs, and then this growing third-party ecosystem. Two of the most important things we've done in the last 6 months is launch our third-party verification program, and we are closing in on the final development of our supply chain tool, which will result in something called the supplier HPD. And so these are really, really important accomplishments. We are doing this on behalf of our members, with the support of our members, and with the active participation of our members. So it's really representing that. So just in closing, what are kind of the key next steps that we see? I think the first thing is really implementing the harmonized data flow so that all the ecosystem tools have access to the data in real time. It's current, it's accurate, it's reliable. And kudos to Sustainable Minds for being a leader in making this happen with their transparency catalog. We have a major effort underway to improve data quality and completeness, which is the way we're going to improve understanding. So we don't have time today to go into some of the challenges here, but there are still many gaps in the reference data, for example, in hazard assessment. And for manufacturers, it's often hard to know what the product contents are, and it takes time. Even if they want to find it out, they don't have access to that information, or it may not exist at all. Surprisingly, many manufacturing processes are not, surprisingly to some, right, that aren't involved with manufacturing. Many manufacturing processes are not instrumented to actually know at 100 parts per million what's in the resulting product. Working with the ecosystem, very, very important. And this is where we are working with a working group within our organization, HPDC, and hope to be able to do more work collaboratively with Vitru. So thank you, Michael, for inviting us to participate today, to develop template specs and make them available through the specification tools such as MasterSpec. And then finally, to drive rapid feedback and learning on a regular basis. So those of you who are users of the HPD Open Standard, please get in touch with us. We have a lot of tools on our website that are available to help really understand what is there. And we want to hear your questions. We want to help you. We have a support team in place. And so I just want to thank you again, Terry and Michael, for inviting us today.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Wendy. That was really interesting there. While Terry switches over, we've got a couple questions coming in here. We're going to try to answer a few of them while we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. So if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them into the question box and shoot them over. I've got one question. I think it's here for you, Wendy. Is the API for manufacturers only, or does it connect to any design tools that architects and engineers use?
Great question. We're just in the early going of implementing the API. We have two. One is for the HPD public repository. This is the one, for example, that's connected already to Mindful Materials through the Origin, the Giga Origin database, and connected to Origin itself, connected to Ecomedes, and we're working on a number of others. What that does is it makes available the published PDF of the HPD. The second API we have is the HPD Builder API. This is a connection to the data. And today we have this implemented with the Portico tool, which is available to some of the project teams. And it's an early access program right now. And we're in the process of working on connecting that. And so ultimately that is designed to connect the manufacturer's data, which is in the builder database, to a number of tools. Some of them are going to be for architects and designers, and some of them are going to be supply chain and other kind of manufacturer-oriented tools. So this could be both. And this is one of our main focuses this year, is to expand those connections and those partners.
Great, that's really interesting. Another question here is where, and I'm gonna rephrase it a little bit to try and make it a little bit clearer or more understandable. What's the best place to get HPDs from with all the different sources that are out there?
I can take that one if you'd like.
Sure.
The authoritative source is the HPD public repository. And if an HPD has been made public, which the word published denotes, then it must be in the HPD public repository. And so, as I mentioned a moment ago, we are in the process of making this API connection, which will push published HPDs out to the various other libraries and directories. So at this moment in time, we've implemented that with a few. And one of the things we're going to be is updating our website in the next few weeks to indicate where those connections exist already. And then with others, they are making an effort themselves to put the HPDs, but ultimately, if you have a question whether an HPD that someone's given you has been published, the authoritative place to go and search is the HPD public repository. It's free. It's available 24/7. It's on our website. And that's the way you can know for sure that you have an officially published HPD.
And I've got one more question here as we sneak in under the hour. What European standards can be applicable to the transparency catalog? What European standards translate to North American standards? So I think what the question is are there European standards that translate to North American standards for HPDs or vice versa?
Well, I can certainly address that within the realm of the HPD and material ingredient disclosures. Right now, there is sort of an overlap. I think to characterize it most effectively, we could say that the main governmental regulatory drivers in Europe that are pertinent are the reduction of hazardous substances, either RoHS, RoHS, depending on who you talk to, and the REACH standard. So these two are generally the regulatory regime that companies are working in within Europe. And we have some level of harmonization with the underlying standards there through the what is called the GHS, Global Harmonized Standard, which deals with hazard and chemical reporting. There are some differences, for example, with green screen, which uses that, but adds some additional lists, for example, to the hazard screening and is prevalent here in North America. As it turns out, there is a lot of interest in this very question, and I'm going to be attending myself a workshop in a couple of weeks in Europe with some of the key players there to discuss how we can harmonize this, because there is a growing interest in doing that. So right now there's some overlap. In general, something like the HPD is a much more specific specification for reporting than those standards. And of course, we have quite a few European-based companies involved with it, and they're looking and seeing some value in that and also wanting to harmonize.
Great, really interesting. And at that, we're just over time. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Wendy and Terry, thank you very much for some really informative presentations, and look forward to working with you all again.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone, for spending time today.
Thank you very much.
On your way out, there is a survey that you can see we're very much into data. You can take the time to fill it in, give us some more information. We'd appreciate that. So have a great day and watch for your trend report, and we'll take your questions as they come over time. Have a great day.